Hello, this is me, Natalie Manahan, and this is my presentation on the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua to the 1979 victory, rough draft version. First, I want to start with Nicaragua, the country. If you look at the map, you'll see Nicaragua with its capital, Managua. To the south is Costa Rica. To the north, Honduras. Over on to the left is El Salvador. Above it is Guatemala. And above that is Belize. Nicaragua is nestled in between two oceans, the Pacific that you see depicted on the bottom and the Caribbean on the top. And Nicaragua is located in Central America. Just something to remember when you're thinking about where it's located. It's also, in addition to being in Central America, it's the largest of the Central American republics. Now, the etymology, or which just means the study of the name, like where the name comes from, the country got its name from the term, or from the word Nicaro, the Nicaro, which are indigenous tribes who lived around what would be modernly known as Lake Nicaragua area. But it wasn't called that back then. It was just the general area where they were known to live during the 15th and 16th century. Just remember that 15th is 1400s, 16th is 1500s. Just remember, every time there's a century, it's one number down. 15th century, 1400s, 16th century, 1500s. In addition, it's the only country in Latin America to be colonized not just by Spain, which is what you would think, but it also, the British colonized it as well. That also doesn't include American occupation. So it's very unique circumstance. And the majority ethnicity or race are the mestizos, which you should remember that we've talked about before, which is basically, in case you forgot, is a mixture of the European, which are those that came from Europe over to Nicaragua, and the indigenous, which are just those who were originally living there, and those are their offspring. Just on a side note on the map, I do enjoy this one because it's from a children's geography book, which I like it just for its basic layout. Here is the flag of Nicaragua. The fun thing about this flag is it actually came into existence around 1908, but wasn't officially recognized or instated until August the 27th, 1971. Note in the title that this is going up to 1979, so this flag wasn't quite, well, it was established, but near the very end of the time we'll be talking about in this presentation. And just remember, all flags have special thought process that goes into making them, including the layout and the color and the design. And this flag is no different. The inspiration for this flag actually comes from two different flags. The first one being the Federal Republic of Central America, which makes sense because, as we established before, Nicaragua is in Central America. And the other one was Argentina, which I had thought this flag design basically looked familiar, and I'm like, oh, it looks similar to Argentina's flag. Another fun fact about this flag that I thought was worth mentioning is Nicaragua's flag is one of the few country flags that uses the color purple. If you look really close into the rainbow flag, you'll see the color purple. The only other one was the Dominica flag, which I would suggest looking that up sometime. It's a very interesting design, but it makes you think about how certain colors reoccur in many flags, but purple isn't really one that seems to be used very frequently. Speaking of symbolism and color, the blue in the flag represents the oceans that surround the country of Nicaragua. Remember the map? Which were the oceans of the Caribbean and the Pacific, which covered the central the blue, which covers the white in the center, like the country. The blue also represents loyalty and justice as well. The white represents peace, which is white is a common symbol of peace. It's also a common color for purity as well. The triangle represents equality, and the rainbow is also, I've read, has said to be like a promise for a better tomorrow. I also believe it's maybe biblically referenced to Noah and the promise to not flood the earth again, kind of like a promise for a better future. Now, as you've seen from the title, you're still asking, who are the Sandinistas? Well, if you think about the Zapatistas, likewise, they come from the name of followers of a real person, and this is no different. The name Sandinistas is taken in honor of Augusto Cesar Sandino, who lived from 1893 to 1944. He was a guerrilla leader during the time the United States was occupying Nicaragua, which is around 1912 to 1933. And he actually was the active leader of the rebellion. It was not just a symbolic leader. He was actually up there in the conflict. So that was from it was up until 1933, till the end of the conflict, 33 to 37. He also teamed up with a liberal, Juan Bautista Sacasa, who had actually returned from being exiled. And what's even crazier, after everything is said and done, he becomes president of Nicaragua in 1932. Unfortunately, not long later, in 1936, he was forced to resign by Somoza, went into exile again, went to the United States, and he lived there until he eventually died. Now, where does that leave Sandino? Well, Sandino was seen, after everything was said and done, was seen more vilified, more seen as a bandit, a cur, a scoundrel. That was more the American perspective. But on the other side, in Nicaragua, in other parts of Latin America, he was seen as more heroic, like the little guy standing up to the United States. So he was very popular. Unfortunately, in 1934, he was assassinated by order of General Anastasio Somoza Garcia. He eventually, 3 years later, becomes president in 1937, and that eventually leads to the 40-year dictatorship by him and his family. Now, as for the Sandinista revolution, as mentioned before, from 1937 to 1979, the Somoza family runs a dictatorship. This lasts around 40 years. Dictatorship is also been referred to as a dynasty, which is dynasties more reference to China, but I can see the relation as it is a family of nepotism that takes on a rule when one dies. It's a little different from monarchy, so I would more agree with that description. And to prove that example, in 1956, General Somoza is actually assassinated. Now, then, instead of someone else from outside the family or the regular presidency continuing, his son takes over. Now, his son dies naturally, the son rather dies naturally, but then his brother takes over. So you see it continues on, and it's never ending. As a response to this, eventually in 1961, the Sandinista Liberation Front, which is also known as the FSLN, the Spanish, abbreviated from the Spanish, which is Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional, was established. The Sandinista Liberation Front is just basically the English translation of that. And it was established by Silvio Mayorga, Tomás Bother, and Carlos Fonseca. The FSLN was inspired by Cuba, actually. And what they were aiming to do, just like Cuba, was to use political and bureaucratic means in combination with military might to overthrow the Somoza dictatorship. So they were willing to use violence and politics to try and make a change. Then around, this is approximation, but around the 1970s or to mid 1970s, 1975, this eventually ends in 1979. The National Guard and the Sandinistas fight each other, get into a big conflict, and the result is the Sandinistas do overthrow the Somoza family dictatorship. Closer around, especially the last 2 years from 77 to 79, it seems like it really kicks up a storm, and it's very intense. The picture here is the Sandinistas storming the plaza at the end of the conflict as like a victorious parade. So it was a very emotional time when this was going on. The aftermath was in 1979, the FSLN was able to overthrow the current president. And I put president in quotation marks because it basically was a joke, and it ran like a dictatorship or a dynasty. I mean, if you want to say monarchy, I wouldn't, but it just was not what it was meant to be when it was said to win the election to be president, as it ran for 40 years under the same family, just with different members taking over. This resulted in the Sandinistas beginning the rule of Nicaragua in the same year, 1979, and lasts till 1990. I'm not going to mention much more than that because there is another presentation that's going to kind of overlap past 1979, and I was told not to get into that, so I won't. But let's just say there's another set of things that are going to be going on. The United States had not intervened in Nicaragua since they left in 1933, and that's important because they had come back. This is actually the second time they had come back in and intervened, and then they had come in and left and come in, and now they just left. It's important to note it's the 1930s in America, so the Great Depression was going on. So it wasn't just the revolutionary conflicts that were the issue. It was also America was having their own financial issues, which also caused a strain between relations between Nicaragua and America. So in conclusion, the main points I'm going to take from the slides, the more like cliff notes, is the Sandinistas were named after Augusto Cesar Sandino. Nicaragua is in Central America. The Nicaragua flag became official in 1971. The Somoza family dictatorship lasts from 1937 to 1979, when the Sandinistas win. The conflict, the Sandinista Liberation Front, or FSLN, was established in 1961. If you want to still look for the Spanish abbreviation, what it actually means, I would suggest looking back at the flag. I just didn't write it again. The United States withdraws from Nicaragua in 1933. I thought that was important because their influence was an earlier conflict, and it basically was resolved when the United States just left. The Somoza dictatorship is overthrown by the Sandinistas in 1979. And this shift is where, in that same year, the Sandinistas are in charge, which will lead to its own challenges. But basically, what to remember is that the Sandinista rebellion wasn't an isolated incident. Instead, it was a series of conflicts that culminated to its ending in 1979, because history does not have a definite cutoff date, and this rebellion did not start out of nowhere. It was a culmination of earlier events as well. Well, like I said before, this is my rough draft, so I hope you enjoyed this all. Thank you, and bye.